Hi, Jeremy Crow here. In this video, I wanted to go over the mythological characters of Enki and Enlil from ancient Sumerian myth. First, I'm going to tell the story of Enki and Enlil, and then I'm going to get a little bit into how these stories evolved over time and influenced subsequent cultures. Now, there are some individuals who do believe that Enki and Enlil are very real entities and that they may even still exist today and have been influencing cultures throughout the millennia, and that different cultures have had different names for them. That is one interpretation of all of this, which is a very interesting concept. Now, a lot of the stories that people have heard about Enki and Enlil were influenced by Zecharia Sitchin. And now he took a lot of the original texts, and translated them, but did so from a more modern perspective. So he kind of was like, well, using our modern knowledge that we have available to us today, what could this potentially mean? And he tried to interpret it that way. So it's not a very scholarly way of doing things, but a lot of interesting concepts ended up coming out of that. So when I retell my story, some of that will have been influenced by these concepts that Zecharia Sitchin came out. And some of the language I'll be using when I tell the story will utilize modern terms for things just to make things a lot easier to tell the story. And anyways, without further ado, I do want to make one little note here that it's extremely hot here today in Toronto. It's actually 33 degrees outside, and so I can't do this in the car without having the air conditioning on, at least just a little bit so that I don't melt. So if there is a bit of ambient noise in this video, I apologize, but it is necessary. So without further ado, the story of Enki and Enlil. So Enki and Enlil, let's say that they were aliens. Just makes it simple. So these entities were part of a civilization of aliens that wanted to develop the earth for its natural resources. And they were doing so, but they decided, you know what, this is really hard work. What we're going to do is we're going to engineer a slave race that will do the work for us. So what they did is they, after several attempts, they managed to come up with a creature that was smart enough to be able to understand what they wanted them to do and had the dexterity, etc., to be able to pull it off, to actually do what they were requiring in mining gold and things like that. But not so smart or long-lived or whatever, to be able to overthrow the alien rulers, the creators, the designers, right, of this slave race. Now, if you haven't guessed yet, this creature, this slave creature that was created by Enki and Enlil is humans. It's us, right? So one of the things that they did in order to create that creature was that they included some of their own DNA in the creature. So that was one of the ways that they got it up to the level that they were requiring so that it could perform the tasks that they needed it to do. But they had much limited lifespans, and they weren't able to reproduce at first, and they weren't nearly as intelligent as these aliens. So they were able to keep them in line and keep them in control their numbers, etc. Now, eventually, these humans were worked so hard that they were complaining too, because, like I said, it was very hard work. And so they're complaining because they're being overworked, and Enlil, the brother Enlil, he's like, get rid of them. This is just annoying. I don't like hearing these guys complain. Let's just wipe them out. And Enki, who took a very special interest in this creation, he felt like he was the creator of this entity, of this creature that we call human now. He was very attached, and he was like, let's just, not wipe them out. I think that they're really cool, and I think that they've got a lot of potential. And Enlil was like, no, let's just abort this whole program, wipe them out, and be done with it, So he makes plans. Enlil makes plans to destroy the humans, to completely genocide the entire race of humans. And Enki, what he does, in order to prevent this, he goes and he teaches the humans knowledge that they weren't supposed to have. Forbidden knowledge that was going to enable them to survive the cataclysm that was going to be enacted by Enlil. So Enki is the benefactor of humanity, while Enlil is genocidal and wants to wipe us all out. So Enlil makes several attempts. He tries drought and famine, and Enki teaches humans how to store grain and things like that. So like agriculture and how to store grain to last for when you're experiencing famine. So they survived that. And there was a flood, and he taught them how to survive that as well, and things along those natures, where he taught them technology and forbidden knowledge that allowed them to survive these cataclysms that were being enacted by Enlil. So Enki was successful in maintaining the survival of the human species, whereas Enlil failed in wiping us all out. That's essentially the story right there. Now, what happens later, when you get into Babylonian and what is it called? Akkadian, I think. But some of the Mesopotamian religions that came after Sumerian that were inheriting these cultural stories and such, they changed the name of Enki to Ea. Ea is how it's spelled in modern Roman characters. So Ea Ea, something like that. And Enlil was shortened down to just El. Now, that's very interesting because in Hebrew, the word El, that same exact syllable, it means God in Hebrew. And it's part of the longer name Elohim, which was kind of means gods in a sense. So you could kind of think of, if you're going to use that terminology, El ends up being God, and Enlil ends up being the Hebrew god, and Enki is something else. Enki ends up being like a competitor in a sense. And if you go even further, you can see in the cultural themes, you can see some of these play out. So one of the interesting things is if you look at Greco-Roman mythology, you'll see that there is the character of Zeus, otherwise known as Jupiter, and he plays this very similar role as Enlil does. He's kind of the bureaucratic ruler, and Prometheus ends up being like the Enki character, where he creates humanity and is the benefactor of humanity. He sees all kinds of potential in them and teaches them knowledge that the gods had that the gods didn't really want humans to have because they wanted to keep them under control. So the parallels are unmistakable. So if you look at the stories, it is very, very clear that Enki ends up being essentially Prometheus. Enlil ends up being Zeus / Jupiter in these stories. And read the stories for yourself and you tell me it's striking. It's so similar. Now we go even further to an alternate culture here where we have the Hebrew scriptures. Now in the Old Testament stories, and in particular if we look at Genesis, we see that there's a character of the serpent in Eden, and there is the god character, and then the rebel god in a sense, but he's demoted to a serpent in Eden. So I'm sure you know the story where the god ends up creating the humans this time, though. He's a creator. He's a creator in this one rather than Enki. Usually Enki is the one that creates humanity, but in the Hebrew they said, oh no, it's Enlil that created humanity, and placed a bunch of restrictions on humanity, actually. And the serpent gives humanity all this extra knowledge that they weren't really supposed to have. Forbidden knowledge. Literally, it says right in there, the tree of forbidden knowledge. He induced them or tempted them to eat from the tree of forbidden knowledge. The knowledge of the gods, it even says right there in the scripture. So clearly the serpent in Eden is that Enki character. It's so similar. It's just striking. The parallels are unmistakable. And the Enlil character is the God character in the Old Testament. I mean, using English terminology, I mean, there was different names for God in the Old Testament, including Elohim and even El. This is the names that were used for Enlil back in previous cultures. So that's how it came down to us, and these are the main stories that we see now for, you know, those the Mesopotamian culture. You have Enki and Enlil. In the Greco-Roman, you have Prometheus and Zeus, Jupiter. And then in the Semitic scriptures, the Hebrew scriptures, you have the serpent in Eden and the god. So that's who these characters are as they come down from the ancient stories. And now, the reason I wanted to do this video really is because I'm seeing a lot of people on different podcasts, especially in the conspiracy theory culture community, that there's a lot of confusion over which one is Enlil and which one is Enki. And people saying, well, this one is a good one and this one's the bad one and things like that. So there's a lot of interpretation, of course, onto which one is the good one and which one's the bad one, especially depending on which culture you're referencing, which culture that you're looking at the world or at these stories, these archetypes through. So for me, personally, the Enki characters are the ones that I look up to, the ones that to me seem like the genuine benefactors of humanity, and that Enki is the one that wants us to succeed, wants us to evolve, wants us to achieve our higher potentials, whereas the Enlil characters throughout history have always kind of wanted to keep humans down. Didn't want them to achieve any sort of level of equality at all, not even close. They wanted to keep that down, wanted to keep them obedient, subservient, and stupid. Ignorant, really, not stupid. Stupid is a measure of intelligence. Ignorance is and knowledge is a measure of how much information and knowledge you have. So really, I meant to say, he wants to keep the Enlil character has always in all the different cultures wanted to keep humanity subservient and ignorant, and didn't want us to reach these higher potentials that are available to us. Whereas the Enki characters, Enki is always the benefactor of humanity in the sense that he gives us knowledge that the other gods don't want us to have, and does it so that we can improve ourselves, that we can achieve higher levels, we can become more, and we can, you know, achieve our fuller potential. So I don't know how else to put it. So that's where my interpretation lies. I'm wondering what my viewers think. Are you more aligned with the Enki side of history, you could say, or the Enlil side? I'd love to hear your comments below, and any other alternate interpretations of this. And even, like, do you believe that Enki and Enlil were real? And do you believe that if they were real, that they're still around and influencing us? I'm very curious to know what your thoughts on that are. Now, I do topics like this all the time. Topics on esotericism, occultism, fringe culture, things like that. So if you like this video, I highly recommend you subscribe and join me on this journey. And until next time, everybody, stay lucid.